Alright, hello. It's been a while since I've done an episode of the podcast because I recently took a week's break off, but I'm back with some more of the Marvel and DC retrospective podcast. And today, for this next month, 4 weeks, um, instead of doing the Flash and DC stuff, I've decided to just take a little bit of a break from that, and in between the seasons of like the DC stuff that I'm doing, I thought I'd cover something Marvel related. And so I think it's time to reveal that I'm going to be covering the first volume of Moon Knight, which is like 38 issues. I'm going to do the whole thing over the next month. I'm going to call this Moon Knight month. Um, it's not a specific month in the year, but I'm thinking of doing this every single time. Like, when I get to a point in DC where I'm like, this is a good time to take a break, that's when I'll do some, like, Moon Knight stuff, and then continue on with the DC stuff afterward. So, yeah, we're starting with Moon Knight, and without further ado, let's get straight into it. Moon Knight, Issue 1, written by Doug Mensch, with art by Bill Sienkiewicz. I had to look up how to pronounce his last name. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. Um, the interesting thing about reading this is that I know nothing about Moon Knight outside of, like, I know he has, like, the multiple personality thing, but that thing isn't really present yet. You'll understand a little bit later when I get to the point where he, like, because he does have multiple identities in this, but they are not multiple personalities. They are just other identities that he creates for himself in order to make crime fighting easier. So yeah, we follow Marc Spector, who is a mercenary. He's a member of a mercenary group led by this man named the Bushman, who has still teeth. He's a really ruthless dude. And basically, because they're mercenaries, they go around Sudan just killing rebel groups. Bushman is he's basically just there to find treasure, and Mark is just like, that's not what I signed on for. So if you're just here to find treasure and you're gonna kill these innocent people that aren't even like, because he's like, the people guarding the treasure are just innocent people. If you're gonna be killing them just to get to this treasure, I want no part in that. And Mark's friend Frenchie shows up, and Mark's just like, look, first chance we get, we're out of here. So the Bushman and his group attack a village, and there is a young woman and her father. The woman's name will be revealed later. Who know where the treasure is, and her father actually made a golden dagger out of the treasure. So he wants to stop Bushman from taking the treasure, so he goes out and he tries to kill Bushman, but Marc Spector's there and he's like, hey, that dude's trying to kill him. And so he hits her father and then instantly regrets it because Bushman just kills him. And Marc Spector can't help but watch. Yeah, Bushman just bites his throat out. You don't get to see it, but it's pretty messed up. And in his dying breath, the father tells Mark to save his daughter. Bushman grabs the golden dagger and is like, "Oh, there really is treasure. Like this is the hint that I needed." And so Mark breaks into the house where this young woman is and tells her to like get out of here. And she's like, "You killed my father, you pig! I hate you!" And she like drives away. He's like, "Look," he's like, he ends up threatening her just to get her to go. He's like, "Get out of here! Or I'll fucking kill you." She's like, "Right, see ya," and she drives off. Bushman's kind of pissed off that he let her go, um, and then he starts just like killing the innocent people. And Mark tries to stop Bushman's guys from gunning them down, and he fails. And they get these innocent people all get shot, and so Mark is like, "I've had enough of you," and tries to beat up Bushman. And Bushman just punches Mark out because he's just too strong. And he knocks Mark out, and then he throws Mark into the desert, and Mark is forced to just wander through the desert, and he eventually dies. Like, he just dies of exhaustion. It becomes at nighttime. Mark is found standing in front of the moon by a group of cloaked guys, and that's when he collapses and dies, and they drag his body into the tomb where we find the young woman from earlier, and they want to help Mark and possibly like see if there's any way to bring him back. but she doesn't want to help him because she thinks that he killed her father and that he was partly responsible, which he was. Overlooking Mark is a statue of the god Khonshu, who looks a lot like Moon Knight in this. Eventually his design would be changed, but right now he just looks like Moon Knight with like a little Egyptian headdress on. There's like a dark, like so it's a statue of Khonshu, and then the dark god Khonshu himself comes from the statue and goes into Mark and brings him back to life. And then instantly Mark is like, I got Khonshu in me. I know everything about Khonshu for some reason. I don't know why. I know everything. But I gotta start working for Khonshu and be his man of vengeance. So he just grabs a cloak and is just like, all right, I'm off. I'm Moon Knight now. See ya. And drives away. And she's like, we gotta go after him. He's acting crazy. And so with the cloak on and a couple of golden daggers, Mark goes and starts killing a bunch of Bushman's men. And then he breaks into Bushman's little club and starts killing all of Bushman's men. And he goes to attack Bushman, but it turns out this woman has followed him, and Frenchie comes up from behind her and grabs her to stop her from getting herself killed, but she screams out in distress, and Mark is like, oh my god, it's the girl. Meanwhile, Bushman manages to get away, and Mark goes and sees that it's just Frenchie grabbing her because she was putting herself in danger. And that's when Mark finally reveals to her that Bushman was the one who killed her dad, because he didn't really have a chance to actually tell her, because she was kind of refusing to listen. And that's when we learn that the woman's name is Marlene. And so Marlene, Frenchie, and Mark all decide to head back to New York, where Mark plans on continuing to be Moon Knight, and seek vengeance on those who are causing trouble in New York, starting with Bushman. Like he's determined to find and stop Bushman once and for all. And in order to help him do that, he creates a couple other identities. There's Jake Lockley, who is a cab driver, and then you got Steve Grant, who is a multi-millionaire. And these are just other identities that he creates for himself. They're not personalities yet. They are just other identities that he uses to just make crime fighting easier, so he can have ears everywhere. Marc Spector is the one that is Moon Knight. You know, Marc Spector is the identity that he is when he's wearing the Moon Knight costume. Steve Grant is the one that is the identity that he is most of the time. That's become like his main identity now. So while he's out fighting, he goes out to he takes down a drug ring, and he finds a pendant, which is Bushman's pendant. So as Jake Long, Mark decides to go and get some answers as to where Bushman possibly is, because he knows that he's in New York now. And that's when he finds out that Bushman has his own burlesque club. So dressing up as Moon Knight, Mark goes to the burlesque club. He just storms in and starts beating the crap out of everyone, and he finds their pendants. So he knows that Bushman is definitely here, and he heads into the office, and he finds the golden dagger, and Bushman's like, gotcha! And he's there, and he's got a gun. He's like, let's go out into the back where it's going to be a bit more peaceful so I can shoot you. Meanwhile, Marlene has followed Mark to the burlesque house, and so she enters just as Bushman's going to shoot him, and that kind of puts Bushman off, and he misses Mark. And then so they start fighting, and Bushman goes to bite Mark's neck, but Mark shoves his baton in his mouth, which gives him an opportunity to get the upper hand against Bushman, and he starts beating the crap out of him. And Marlene is like, stop, because he just won't stop, and she ends up having to force Mark to stop beating up Bushman. She's like, you're gonna kill him, he killed my father, not yours. I don't want him to be dead. And Mark's just like, alright, the police are here, we probably should get out of here. And so he and Marlene decide to leave Bushman's body for the police. He's still alive, obviously. And Mark is like, from now on, I'm going to be protecting New York City as Moon Knight. And Marlene is like, oh, well, you're already starting to become a legend. And that's when the police show up. They see Bushman's body, and they see like a little like moon ring, I want to call it. It's like a batarang but moon shaped, left behind, which is kind of the beginning of the legend of Moon Knight being seeded throughout New York City. And that's where the first issue ends. Great start overall. I think it was quite long because it's like we're being told his origin, and then we're also being told like his first proper adventure as Moon Knight. But yeah, that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. And now we're going to be going on to issue 2, which involves the Skid Row Killer, or whatever is his name. Alright, so the Skid Row Slasher. So basically, this mysterious murderer known as the Skid Row Slasher is going around finding bums and asking them if they know where a specific thing or person is. And whenever the bum says that they don't, he's like, you're lying to me, and then he just kills them and slashes them. And Moon Knight, who it is actually confirmed in this issue that Moon Knight is a different identity. I said previously that like Marc Spector is Moon Knight, but Marc Spector is not Moon Knight. Moon Knight is another identity, is a fourth identity, separate from all the others. Mark is when he's as Steve, like as Steve Grant. Steve says that Moon Knight is the identity that has no emotion, void of all emotion. So he's hunting for the Skid Row Slasher. He finds a Jewish man who's being attacked by a group of guys, and saves him, and then Frenchie comes with his helicopter and takes Moon Knight away, and Moon Knight asks Steve to take him back to his like Jake Long's cabby, so that he can put his cabbie suit on. And so he does that, and then he heads over to Gina's, which is a friend of his. And it's a place where he usually gets like information, because he's kind of hoping to get information on the Skid Row Slasher. And when he heads to Gina's, he sees on the newspaper that the Skid Row Slasher has just killed someone again, which really messes Mark up, because he's like, man, I failed to save another person. And then one of Jake's friends, Crowley, comes in. He's like, Gina, Jake, my friend just got murdered. And that's when Jake is like, this is personal now, and I need to figure out who the Skid Row Slasher is. So he heads back to his mansion as Steve, and this is when it's revealed that Steve and Marlene are dating. And but Marlene doesn't fully understand this whole Skid Row Slasher situation. She just sees it as like, oh, it's a random murderer that, that Steve is determined to kill. And she's like, why can't you just focus on our relationship and not on this stupid murderer that has nothing to do with us? She doesn't realize that it's personal. Crowley decides to head home to his apartment, but he gets kicked out of his apartment, and so he comes across another homeless guy, and that's when it's revealed that like all the homeless people that are being killed are related to Crowley in some way. Like they all know each other. And that's when Crowley comes across a body. He's like, oh my god, a dead body! Ah! He runs into an alleyway, and that's when the Skid Row Slasher comes up behind him. And Crowley tries to get away, and the Skid Row Slasher is just like, you're not getting away, I'm gonna kill you! No! And then we don't get to see it, but off panel, somebody scares the Skid Row Slasher away, you would assume that it was Moon Knight. But I don't know if it was Moon Knight because Steve and Marlene are busy, making out as this is going on. It turns out that Steve actually brought the statue of Khonshu back to his mansion. I think basically because this ends with Steve heading off to be Moon Knight for a bit, and it's assumed that he showed up and stopped the Skid Row Slasher as Moon Knight, unless we're leading into something where it's revealed that somebody did save Crawley and we won't find out who it is until later. But yeah, Gina opens the door to her diner. That's when Crawley comes in bleeding, and so she takes him to the hospital because she doesn't just own a diner, she's also a nurse. And so Crawley gets put into the hospital to feel better, and the police refuse to chase up leads on this murderer because all he's doing is killing homeless people, and they don't see that as important enough to deal with. And they're we got better things to do. We'll send some mugshots. We might send a mug book, but that's it. That's all we're gonna do. And Gina gets really pissed off. And one of the cops even tries to hit on her, and she's like, I'm gonna punch you in your ugly face. You freak, get out of here if you're not gonna help my friend. Meanwhile, Jake is followed in his cab by a couple of boys. They meet up with Jake as he arrives at Steve's mansion. And the first thing Jake does when these guys are like, hey, you're Jake, is he just punches them out. And they're like, whoa, 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 we're Gina's kids. She just wanted us to find Jake because she needs his help. And Marlene shows up with a gun and just gives away the fact that Jake and Steve are the same person. And so Mark is just like, alright, I might as well just tell them all the truth. So I'm Jake, and I'm also Steve, and I'm also Moon Knight. And he reveals his identity of Moon Knight to Crawley and Gina. And then he says to Crawley and Gina, he says, I need informants. I need people to help me while I'm fighting as Moon Knight. So, can I hire you to just, get information and stuff for me? I'll pay you. You can live in a nice apartment and stuff. And Crawley's... But the one thing for Crawley is that, even though he's going to get paid by Mark, he still needs to have the appearance of a homeless man because that's going to be how they get their information. So, from now on, Crawley is going to be well off, but he's still going to look like a homeless dude because it's a character that he's now playing. That's when we learn a bit about Crawley's past. He was a salesman, and as a salesman, the salesman life gets, pretty lonely, even though he has a wife. Being a salesman is just rough. So he ends up turning to drinking, and that causes problems with his wife, who eventually gets pregnant, and they have a son, and they just start arguing about the son, and eventually she takes the son and leaves, and Crawley decides to head to New York, where he just nosedives and ends up where he is now. So he isn't... So he's kind of he's one of those homeless people that, if he set his mind to it, he could get out easily. It's not like he's, addicted to drugs or anything. It's he can get his life back whenever he wants. He just doesn't think he deserves it, But now he's looking forward to finally capturing this murderer and getting his life back on track. And that's when Marlene finally realizes that this really is personal, and she's like, I'm sorry about how I acted earlier. This is important. It's personal. They're hurting people that you care about. So they managed to try and catch the Skid Row Slasher. Moon Knight pretends to be a homeless guy, but it doesn't work because he ends up punching just a regular homeless dude that's just like, hey man, I was just looking for coins and cash. I'm sorry I bothered you. It turns out Crawley actually tried to save a guy in an alleyway from the Skid Row Slasher, but he managed to get away. So Moon Knight heads after him because he's only just run away. So he heads after the Skid Row Slasher and tackles him, and they have a big fight. And they capture him, and they send him away. And Crawley's like, I recognize his face, so I could probably point him out at court and, testify against him. And Moon Knight's like, I'll meet you at court. I'm gonna be there. And Crawley heads back to his apartment, and he's like, man, why do I recognize this Skid Row slasher, and he pulls out a cigar box and he opens it up, and that's when he realizes why he recognizes who the Skid Row slasher is. So we go to the courtroom, and Crowley is brought up to the podium, and he refuses to testify against the Skid Row slasher, and he says, the reason why I am refusing is because the Skid Row slasher is my son, and I'm the reason he's murdering people. Because I'm the reason his mum died. Because apparently after his wife and son left, his wife died, his son had no one, he blamed his dad, and that's who he's been looking for. He's been going, he knows his dad is a homeless man, so he's been going to every single homeless person to see if they're his dad, and then killing them if they lie to him about, who his father is. So the Skid Row slasher turns against everyone in the courtroom, shoots a policeman dead, and tries to make a run for it. So Moon Knight goes after him and meets him on top of a rooftop. And the Skid Row slasher is like, he killed my mom. Like, he killed him. And, like, he kind of, like, is walking to the edge of the building. And Moon Knight's like, whoa. Like, son, calm down. We're not going to hurt you. Like, we want to help you. Like, we're here for you. And that's when Crowley's son falls over the edge of the building. Moon Knight tries to save him, but he's too late. And the Skid Row slasher falls to his death. We never actually find out his real name, which is sad. But yeah, he falls to his death and he dies. And Crowley is left mourning his dead son. And he vows from then on to help Moon Knight any way he can, and he kind of sees this as a way of avenging the death of his son by trying to right the wrongs that he did in his past. And that's it. That's the end of the second issue. And I will say, when I was reading this, the reveal that, like, the Skid Row slasher was Crowley's son really shocked me, and I did not see it coming. And when it happened, I was like, of course it's his son. It wasn't obvious. It was a great plot twist. I really enjoyed this issue. I would say this one was better than the first one. Definitely. Alright, so issue 3 of Moon Knight. Moon Knight has to deal with the mysterious Midnight Man, who is this criminal who at midnight just goes around and steals precious artifacts. At the same time that Moon Knight is doing other things. So Moon Knight stops an arsonist, and Midnight Man steals a special artifact. Moon Knight takes down a hitman, and Midnight Man steals a necklace from an opera singer. So Steve Grant decides that he needs to become Jake Lockley in order to get the information that he needs in order to find Midnight Man. So he goes to his favorite place to get information, which is Gina's place, where Crowley is currently, because he's always there. But before he goes, he eats at, like, this, there's this woman named, like, Netta, who works at their place. I think she's supposed to be, like, a maid or something. And because he's Jake, and this is the 80s, Jake is just a real asshole and, like, slaps her on the ass for no reason. And then leaves, and he's like, see ya. Meanwhile, Samuels, who is Steve Grant's butler, goes to check up on the helicopter, because Jake tells him to. He goes up there, and he goes inside it and pretends that he's flying it. And then Frenchie comes along and is like, hey, Samuels, you want to actually fly the helicopter? Samuels is just like, no, Butler is too good for that. So that part's pretty funny. So Jake heads to Gina's, and he asks Crowley if he has any information on the Midnight Man. He even gives Crowley a new hat, and Crowley's like, I can't be bought by new hats. And also, I'm sorry, I don't have the information for Midnight Man, but there might be some information over at the Billiard Emporium. Like, they might be able to help you. So Jake goes over there to ask for some information, and they refuse to tell him, and then Crowley lets them know that Jake would have given them money, and so they decide to try and attack Jake in the alleyway outside, but they instead get attacked by Moon Knight. And Moon Knight's like, how are you going to give me the free information that I need if you steal Jake's money? And so he beats them up and he gets the information out of them and heads back to the mansion of Steve Grant in order to throw a party in hopes that it might lead to some leads on Midnight Man, because he believes that if he throws like a super rich party, Midnight Man will probably show up to the party as a guest without him knowing, and maybe he'll be able to figure out who it is. So he holds like a little party, and then that's when this man named Anton Mogart, comes up to Steven and basically says, "Hey man, I'm a collector of all these like crazy things, and I'm afraid that Midnight Man is going to come and try and steal my things. And I know that you have ties to Moon Knight, so I was wondering if I could hire Moon Knight in order to help me stop Midnight Man from stealing my stuff." And so Steve is like, "Yeah, of course, man. I'll help you." And so Steve puts on his Moon Knight garb, becomes Moon Knight, and he's like, "Hey, Frenchie, let's go. We gotta go to Mogart's house because apparently Midnight Man's gonna be there." So they head into the Moon Knight copter, which now is actually the shape of a crescent moon. It looks real weird and very impractical. And they fly over to Mogart's house, and Moon Knight enters Mogart's house, where a statue almost kills him, which is a little bit suspicious. He like hits a tripwire and shoots an arrow at him, and that's when he crosses paths with Midnight Man, who is in the house. And it turns out that Midnight Man is actually Mogart. So Moon Knight smashes Midnight Man against like a grandfather clock, or like a glass cabinet, and pulls his mask off and reveals that he's Mogart. And it turns out that Mogart is just obsessed with collecting things, and that all the things that he has in his house is the stuff that he's stolen as Midnight Man. He's just a psychopath who just like, but he doesn't kill, like, he does, like, he's never killed anyone before. He just steals things, but killing Moon Knight is going to be the first time that he kills. So Moon Knight and Mogart get into a massive fight, which ends up in the elevator, which takes them up to the top of the roof. And they crash out of the... I guess they're in the attic, and then they crash out of the attic straight out into the outside of, like, the roof, so that now they're outside. And, one of them's gonna die. Basically, it says one of them's going to die at midnight. And it seems like it's going to be Moon Knight because he's about to be stabbed. But then Marlene shows up and shoots Mogart, and he loses his footing and he falls into the river down below. And Moon Knight tries to save him by grabbing his cloak, but his cloak gets ripped off. And then it turns out that it turns out Mogart probably isn't dead because they never found a body. Also, Moon Knight decides to take a couple of paintings from Mogart, and then he donates them to a museum as Marc Spector. But he keeps Mogart's cloak and puts it in his own house because he expects that Mogart is going to come back and get it because he's a collector. And that's when Marlene reveals that her gun has quite a wide arc, and she doesn't trust it, especially when both of them were so close together. So she actually shot rubber bullets. She didn't shoot real bullets. So it's guaranteed that Midnight Man is going to come back. And that's where it ends. It ends with the reveal that Marlene used rubber bullets instead of real ones. I thought Midnight Man had died for a sec, and I was like, wow. It seemed like they were setting up this character to kind of be like Moon Knight's arch nemesis. And I guess I was right, because that seems to be where they're going with this, where like Midnight Man is going to be a reoccurring antagonist for Moon Knight. I'm looking forward to seeing where this story goes next when he eventually comes back. Alright, so issue 4 of Moon Knight. Moon Knight versus the Committee. So, Moon Knight is just in New York City, It's assumed he's in New York. I'm pretty sure he is because they mentioned the Daily Bugle in a previous issue. He's nearby a local ice rink, and this dude with a sniper rifle tries to shoot Moon Knight, and he does, and he thinks that he's killed Moon Knight, but it turns out he didn't. Moon Knight just comes up and is like, "Hey, I bet you wish I was dead." And so this guy just flashes, like shoots towards Moon Knight's face, and the flash of the gun, of the rifle, makes him go like, "Ah!" And then, like, this dude smacks Moon Knight in the face and then runs away. And it turns out that these guys are 5 hitmen who have been hired by this group known as the Committee in order to kill Moon Knight. So, their names are Boom Boom, who does explosives, Razor, who has knives, Dragon, who is a martial artist, Ice, who is the sniper that we just saw, and Bull, who is a guy who hates using weapons and only wants to use his fists. He's just a big brute. The reason why the Committee are going after Moon Knight is actually explained in a second. So, back in Werewolf by Night issues 32 and 33, which were Moon Knight's debut, Frenchie is currently a member of the Committee, and he was back then. Right now, he's kind of just like a fake member, but back then he was a real member. And the Committee wanted Frenchie's help in order to take down this werewolf character who is Werewolf by Night, aka Jack Russell. And Frenchie suggested that he get his friend Marc Spector to deal with it. And at the time, Marc Spector had only just become Moon Knight, and he hadn't gained all of his identities yet. Like Steve Grant didn't even exist yet. And so Moon Knight goes after Werewolf by Night. They fight. Moon Knight discovers that Werewolf by Night is just an unfortunate dude named Jack Russell, and is like, "Oh man, sorry for beating you up. Like, let's be on each other's side." And Moon Knight turns against the Committee and steals the money that they were going to give him anyway. And then uses that money to become Steve Grant. That's how he becomes Steve Grant, is that he takes the Committee's money and creates this new persona. And so now the Committee want revenge on him, so they're sending these hitmen after him. So Steve Grant gets home, and he just starts working out with Marlene. That's when Frenchie shows up and reveals that the Committee are currently putting a hit on him, and we get the flashback that I just told about. So Steve dresses up as Jake, like he becomes Jake, and he goes and he hires Gina's kids to help him get information on the members of the group that are hunting him, because they don't know the names of these hitmen. So her kids go to this club, and they find a guy in there, and they hold him at gunpoint, and they get a couple of the names out of him. Meanwhile, Frenchie goes back to the Committee, and he tricks them into telling him their plan, because, you know, they still believe that Frenchie is one of them. So yeah, the Gina's kids learn that 2 of the names are Bull and Boom Boom, and then Marlene gets a job at the club that Ice works at, so that she can meet Ice and get to know him, so that, you know, they can have a one-up on him. Boom Boom sets up some bombs in an alleyway to trick Mark. A cat goes over and starts sniffing them, so Moon Knight saves the cat from the explosives. The explosives go off and trap Moon Knight under some rubble, and Boom Boom thinks he's dead, but then Moon Knight bursts out of it and chases after Boom Boom, and Boom Boom manages to get away. And then they just continue investigating the different hitmen, and they find that 2 of them, Dragon and Razor, are going to see a boxing match. So Steve and Steve and Frenchie go there in order to watch the match, so that they can, so that Moon Knight can fight Razor and Dragon. So Moon Knight appears at the match, and he goes after Razor and Dragon, who manage to get away, and he follows them into an abandoned building, and then he fights them, and he just knocks the shit out of them and just beats the crap out of them, and they're both gone. They're both finished. And then Bull shows up and just beats the crap out of Moon Knight. And then he runs off and he calls Ice and Boom Boom. He's like, "Hey guys, I just came into conflict with Moon Knight. He took out Dragon and Razor like they were nothing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn against the committee. We're gonna kill them all and we're gonna steal all their money. Screw taking down Moon Knight. We can't beat this dude." So Moon Knight finds out the plan, and he heads to the committee building in order to stop them. Ice heads up to the top of the building, and he actually comes into conflict with Marlene. Meanwhile, Moon Knight watches as like Bull manages to like break through the committee and take their money, and Boom Boom blows up the entire committee building, killing himself. Like, he's just straight up dead. And so the only ones left are Bull and Ice. Bull tries to get away on a boat. He's like, "Screw the money, I'm getting out of here." And he heads away on a boat. And Ice is trying to shoot Moon Knight from a distance because Moon Knight is on the same boat as Bull, and he accidentally shoots Bull and kills him. And then Bull dies. And his dead body falls into the boat and causes it to crash into the dock. And that's when Marlene kicks the gun out of Ice's hands, but Ice almost strangles Marlene to death. And so Moon Knight comes up and he grabs Ice's gun and he just breaks it in half and smacks Ice across the face and is like, "Screw you, you get your hands off of her." And so in the end, Ice is the only one who survives this. And I have a feeling that, like, he's probably going to return at some point. And who knows, maybe he'll have more hitmen with him. Or maybe he'll just become a lone hitman who, wants revenge on Marc for killing his teammates and stuff. That'd be interesting. I'd like to see that. But that's where it ends. Steve decides to keep the money, and he divvies it up between all of his friends. And he's like, "Hey, I don't need this money because I'm rich, so I'm going to split it between all of you." And that's where it ends. It ends with Crowley being like, "Hey, let's go on a vacation. Doesn't that sound good after all the shit that we've been through?" And that's it. That was issue 4. I'd say it was like not as good as the ones that came before it, but like I still enjoyed reading it. I just think the villains were like, they're just pretty generic. They're basically just Moon Knight's version of the Enforcers, which is a group of Spider-Man villains who are all just like tough dudes that work for gangs. But yeah. Alright, issue 5 of Moon Knight. It's one of those issues that has like flashbacks of there's basically 2 separate stories going on at the same time. What happened in the past, what happened in the present, and I think to make things easier, I'll just explain everything that happens in the past and then talk about what happened in the present. So, before this story takes place, there are these 3 characters: Edward Redditch, Creech, and Parkins. And they're all friends, they're all childhood friends. And when Redditch was a child, his dad was like a murderer who shot people. He was known as the Red Killer or the Red Hunter. And then his dad was shot and died. So his dad was then killed by somebody with a shotgun, and it was assumed that it was his, it was later assumed that it was his mother, which she got put away for it. And then Redditch received a note, like a letter saying that his mother had been declared dead, and that she had like $500,000, which was a lot of is a lot of money now, but it was especially a lot of money back in the 80s. She had $500,000 in her name, and Edward declared that it was his money, and so he teamed up with Creech and Parker, and they head over to the municipal building in order to steal her money. And Redditch makes things get a little bit out of hand because he straight up shoots a woman and kills her, and so they take the money and they run away, and they get into a massive cop chase. And at the time, Marc Spector is in his Jake Lockley identity, and so he hears what's going on, and he becomes Moon Knight, and he goes after them. The three criminals, Redditch and the gang, manage to get away from the police, and Redditch actually gets shot by the police, and then he opens up the case, and he sees what's inside it, and he's like, alright, this is mine, see ya, and he turns on his friends and runs away, and gets into a car and drives off, and one of them still has a shotgun, and he shoots at Redditch and hurts him even more. And Redditch flees to his old house that he used to live in. And so Creech and Parker go to the house. The house, legend says that the house is like haunted still. The windows are painted red, but it's not. Like, the rumor is that it's not paint, it's actually the blood of all the people that Redditch's father killed. So they head into the house, and the present stuff is literally just they're wandering around the house looking for Redditch's money, looking for Redditch because they believe that he's in the house, still alive. Meanwhile, Moon Knight is following them throughout the house, accidentally scaring them without trying to. Eventually, they find Redditch's... Like, they find a skeleton. I think it's supposed to be his father's skeleton, holding a shotgun that's set off to shoot Critch and Perkins, which they manage to duck out of the way when it happens. And then they actually find like a little boiler, and they decide that they've had enough because they can't find Redditch, and they'd rather just get out of the house alive. So they burn all the money up, and when they burn the money up, the boiler explodes, like the incinerator explodes. And when it explodes, they find that there is a hatch, and they go into the hatch and they find a tunnel, and they realize that Redditch probably built the tunnel. And they go through the tunnel, but they're also kind of worried that maybe Redditch is on the other side, but they go through anyway. And when they get out of the other side, Moon Knight is there, and he just beats the crap out of them. And that's when he finds Eddie Redditch's graveyard, and it's an open grave. And he opens up the casket, and Eddie Redditch is in there, dead, with a shocked look on his face. His hair has gone white. He is still bleeding out, but it's assumed that he didn't actually die from bleeding out. He died from being scared. And then Eddie's mother appears and says that she was trying to get her son to come back to the house, because it's assumed she was planning on killing him, because she's holding a shotgun as she's saying this, and she was like, I gotta do the dirty deed of killing my own son because he's a murderer. And that she did kill her husband out of out of self-defense. And so Moon Knight decides to take Mrs. Redditch away from the house, so that she never has to go back there ever again. And that's it. That's the whole story. It's a bit of an odd one. I think it was oddly paced because of like the flashbacks going in between. There were a couple of moments where like it would be very easy for somebody to be reading this, miss the little like note in the corner that says then and now, and be a bit confused and be like, wait, at what point in time are we? You know. So but yeah, it was good. I liked it. I have noticed that there's been a bit of a steady decrease in these stories. Not that they're like getting bad, but like this isn't as good as like the early issue, like issues like 1 through 3, and same with the last one, you know. All right, so Moon Knight issue 6. So coming back from fighting as Moon Knight, Stephen Grant receives a wire from a old friend of his named Joshua Mendoza, telling him to come to St. Lucian because he has he's calling a favor, or at least he calls it a marker. And Steve is being a little bit like not fully truthful with like who Joshua is and why he wants to go to St. Lucian, because he gets Marlene and he's like, hey, we're going to St. Lucian on a trip. And then he goes to Gina's, where Crowley, Gina, and her kids Ricky and Ray are, and they're like, hey, we're all going to St. Lucian. You know when Stephen Grant promised that we'd go on a holiday? Yeah, we're going to St. Lucian. Secretly, though, I'm going there in order to talk to a friend about something that's going on. Also, the wire is to Marc Spector specifically. It's very important that I iterate that, because this is the first issue, since the first issue, that Marc Spector actually appears just as himself. Which is interesting, because he's very much the kind of guy that's like, I'm not Marc Spector anymore, really. I'm these other people. So they all head to St. Lucian, and Marlene just straight up is just like, alright, cut the bullshit, Steve. Like, we know that you didn't just come here on a holiday. Why did you come here? And Steve is like, I'm here to see an old friend. His name's Joshua Mendoza. He's now the director of the police. I used to know him when I was a mercenary. And so they go to see Joshua, and Joshua basically says that people are going missing, and they reckon that it has something to do with voodoo. It's specifically this voodoo called Le Ange Blanc, which is known as the White Angel of Death. And that this voodoo priest or has been reincarnated as somebody within the village, and they essentially raise people from the dead under their control, and they're known as like Zuvembes. And so Joshua is basically just asking Mark to look into this and see what's going on and see if he can stop them. See if you can find out the truth, if it really is this voodoo priest or if it's just regular criminals. Either way, he needs it stopped because people are going missing and possibly dying, which isn't a good thing. Joshua also tells Marlene how he and Mark know each other. When Mark was a mercenary, he almost got killed while hiding behind a gravestone, and Joshua was there with him, and he stopped Mark from getting shot, and ever since then, Mark has owed Joshua a favor. So Mark is sent to go and speak with Joshua's wife, and Joshua says that the voodoo priest is going to be coming for her if she doesn't lock the door, and so she tells Mark to leave. She's just like, get out, I'm locking the door, the voodoo priest is going to be coming soon. And as Mark leaves, he hears people getting kidnapped, and he finds men who are wearing skeleton costumes. So we already have a bit of a hint that this whole voodoo thing isn't real. They're not real Zuvembes, they're just guys in costumes. He saves the people in the truck, but they refuse to leave because they believe that they were being abducted by the White Angel of Death. And also, there's something else about them that will be... There's another reason why they won't leave the truck. We just don't know that yet. We'll find out later. They're very afraid. They're afraid of Moon Knight because they think that he is the White Angel of Death. Moon Knight gets ganged up on 4 of these guys, and they actually beat him because in the Werewolf by Night issues, he got bitten by the werewolf, and that gave him like extra strength and stuff, but now it's starting to wear out, and he's becoming a normal dude again, so he doesn't have powers anymore. So, Mark speaks to Marlene, and he's like, the hardest thing about doing this job is that this is the kind of stuff that I wouldn't have done as Marc Spector. Like, I wouldn't have helped these people who were forced to make this plantation, because there's a plantation, there's like a sugarcane plantation. Like, as Marc Spector, I wouldn't have done anything about this kind of stuff, and I hate Marc Spector because of that. So we're getting a little bit of a thing of Mark being like, I hate myself, which is why I am Steve Grant and Jake Lockley all the time, because I hate Marc Spector. So as Jake Lockley, Mark gets Josh and Ricky and Ray and Crawley and Frenchie to go out and look for clues in regards to the voodoo stuff to see if they can find any of these Zuvembes. Ricky and Ray and Joshua get kidnapped by... Well, they don't get kidnapped. They jump into the truck. They take the opportunity to jump into the back of the truck and they get taken off to where the voodoo priest is. Meanwhile, Frenchie and Crawley find the sugar plantation, and when they get there, they find a poppy field. And so it's pretty obvious that the poppy field is used to make heroin. And it turns out that the voodoo priest is actually just a white dude named Faval who is taking advantage of the people in this village by pretending to be a voodoo priest. And he's using drugs. He's basically drugging people so that they work for him, which is why they just obey him and are so obedient and so out of it. It's because they're high on heroin. So Crawley and Frenchie are kidnapped and are going to be killed, and Ricky and Ray are going to become Zuvembes. And then Moon Knight shows up, and a massive fight breaks out with Vaval's group. Moon Knight beats up all of the Zuvembes, and then Vaval goes after Joshua and corners Joshua in like his little heroin house where he stores all his heroin. He shoots, like he goes to shoot at Joshua, but then Marlene... Oh wait, no, it's not Marlene. Wait, was it Marlene? No, Joshua shoots at him. Sorry, I was thinking to the past issue when Marlene shot the bad guy. Now Moon Knight shows up and hits Vaval's gun out of his hands, and then Joshua shoots Vaval, which sends him falling back into a pillar, like into a post, which breaks, and all the heroin falls on top of him, and he dies smothered by heroin, which is a fitting death, which is quite ironic. And then Gina, they get back. Joshua's like, hey, thanks, Mark, for helping me. And they get back to where Gina is, and Gina is just like, I can't believe you had my kids almost died because of you. They're not going to be working for you anymore. At least for 1 week. And that's where it ends. And it ends with like a hint at what the next issue is going to be. The Moon Kings. Which, that sounds pretty goofy. I wonder what that's going to be about. I know it's not going to be goofy at all, because Moon Knight, and Moon Knight is a very serious comic. But the Moon Kings is just like... Are we going to get a little bit more into Khonshu? Because I think I forgot to mention in the previous issue that, like, Steve Grant has mentioned that, he feels something about... There's something about the Khonshu statue that is off-putting to him. Because right now, we don't know that the spirit of Khonshu is actually inside the statue. They just think that it's just a regular statue that gave him powers. But they're starting to sense that there's something else about this statue. So we're getting a little bit of that seeded throughout this story. Also, in this issue, Mark straight up says, I do not have DID. I am just a guy with multiple identities. I do not have multiple personalities. He straight up says it in this one. So Doug Mensch was like, cut it out. He doesn't have multiple personalities. And then eventually another writer would come in and be like, actually, he does. Right, so Moon Knight issue 7 is incredibly insane. It's the craziest issue so far. Jake Lockley has a mustache now. You know, that's pretty crazy. But that's not the only crazy thing that happens in this. In fact, that's possibly the least craziest thing. Sorry, what's his name? Crawley. Almost forgot his name there for a sec. Crawley, good friend of Jake Lockley, basically comes up to Jake and is like, hey man, there's this guy I'm friends with named Redskin. I don't want to go into why he's called that. I don't know why he's called that, but it sounds a little bit racist. He lives in Chicago, and he says that something's going to happen to Chicago that rips it apart by the seams. And so Jake's like, that doesn't sound good. I should probably go to Chicago and figure out what the hell Crawley is talking about. Meanwhile, in Chicago, there's this guy named Simon and his group who they dress up in like werewolf and Frankenstein masks, and they plan on infecting the water system in Chicago for reasons that we will find out later. So Jake goes to Gina's, where he says that he's going to go to Chicago and help Crowley, and that he's not going to need Ricky and... what are their names? Ricky and Ricky? Ricky and Ray. Yeah, Ricky and Ray. There's so many different characters in these books that it's really hard to remember everyone's names. Like, I know that, like, when I've read more, I'll remember them off by heart, but, you know, I'm still trying to get it. Like, I'm still getting into Moon Knight, so I'm still trying to remember all these characters' names, especially because one of them has 4 different names that I gotta remember. I know in an earlier issue, I called Jake Lockley Jake Long by accident. I was thinking about a cartoon. Anyway, Jake calls Marlene and tells Marlene that he's going to be going to Chicago, and that she needs to order a bed, like a room for them, and then some single rooms for Frenchie and the butler. So, meanwhile, Simon's group goes to the municipal water plant, and they dump a bunch of shit in the water, like a bunch of stuff in the Chicago water systems. And then Chicago starts like drinking the water, and then the water starts making them go crazy. So like, and they start attacking each other, and everyone starts going homicidal. So Moon Knight and the gang all go to Chicago, and Moon Knight starts going throughout the city of Chicago trying to figure out what's making everyone go crazy. And eventually he figures out that it's the water, and Frenchie drinks the water, and then he goes crazy while he's in the moon copter, and he causes the moon copter to crash into the ocean because he tries to kill Moon Knight. And so Moon Knight jumps into the water and he saves Frenchie, and then Frenchie tries to kill him again, and then Moon Knight ties him up and puts him in a boat and's like, you stay here, I gotta go and make sure that Marlene doesn't drink the water and go crazy as well. He eventually finds the people responsible for what's going on. He tries to call Marlene to stop her from drinking the water, but the woman in control of like the phone lines drank the water, and so she goes crazy and cuts the line. So eventually Moon Knight finds the leader, Simon, and he chases after him, but one of his allies, who wears a Frankenstein mask, threw a gas grenade, and after breathing the gas grenade in, Moon Knight begins to hallucinate, and he starts seeing everyone as Moon Kings, which are like these aliens in like the moon's crater. So he believes that he's fighting these Moon Kings, and then they capture him, like they beat the crap out of him, they capture him, and they bring him to what he sees as a monster, but is in actual fact a train. The train is coming right at Moon Knight, and then meanwhile, Marlene is revealed to have drunk the water, and she is announcing that she is going to find Moon Knight, like Stephen Grant, and she is going to murder him because now she's gone crazy, homicidal, maniac mode. And that's where it ends. It ends on a little cliffhanger right there, and we'll find out how this cliffhanger is continued in issue 8. Did I enjoy this one? Kinda, but I think the cliffhanger makes it so that, like, I can't really decide if I like this story or not. It's all gonna depend on how it ends in the next issue. You know, if the next issue is shit, then I'm gonna be like, issue 7, you know, not that great. Like, pretty mediocre because it had a bad ending. But if the next issue is, like, you know, pays it off, I'll be like, you know what? These 2 issues weren't as good as the other stuff, but they were okay. You know? Time will tell. We'll find out in issue 8. So let's get straight into it. Right, so issue 8, we continue right where issue 7 left off. The entirety of Chicago has gone crazy thanks to the drugs that have been put in the water system by Simon and his gang of Halloween mask-wearing criminals. I forgot to mention that in the previous issue, Redskin, whose real name is Ernie, was killed by Simon for leaking information. You know, that's mentioned again in this, because Crowley would eventually go to Ernie's apartment, in order to discover what's been put into the water system, and that's when he finds out that Ernie's dead. So Moon Knight has been gassed, and it's assumed that the drug is in the gas because he gets drugged by it, and like he starts hallucinating and seeing like the Moon Kings, and he thinks that a giant train coming after him at him is a big snake. So he dodges out of the way, and then he climbs onto the train, still thinking it's a snake. He's like, I gotta cut the head of the snake off. And he runs along the top of the train, and then the gas starts wearing off, and he realizes that he's just on a train. So he jumps inside the train, and everyone on the train is trying to kill this innocent woman, and so Moon Knight beats the crap out of them, beats up the engineer, saves the woman, and stops the train from crashing by turning off the systems, like putting on the brakes. Meanwhile, Marlene's just like, where are you, Steve? I want to fucking kill you. Yeah. And she's like going crazy from drinking the water. Moon Knight is walking through like the underwater systems of like the subway systems of Chicago. And he finds a little hole, and he hears two people talking to each other, and he goes into the hole and he discovers that it's Crowley talking to this guy that he's been getting information from. But when Moon Knight shows up, the guy's just like, oh my god, it's Moon Knight, and he runs away, and Crowley's just like, hey, that was my informant. Luckily he didn't run away. Luckily he was here long enough to tell me where Ernie's apartment is, so I'm gonna go to Ernie's apartment, and you should go and find Marlene and make sure that she hasn't drunk the water. So they go their separate ways. Meanwhile, the mayor of Chicago has sent, like, actual army men to go and deal with the rioters, like, to go and deal with, like, the homicidal maniacs. But some of them have drunk water as well, so now there are, like, people with firearms amongst the homicidal, like, maniacs. Simon is doing all this because he wants $25 million in cash, and he wants the mayor to drop it off on top of a building, and if he does so, then they'll make the water system go back to normal, like they'll give them the cure to the drugs, and if they don't do it, then they'll poison the water system and kill everyone. And Simon is just a psychopath, because he starts, like, killing his own guys. Like, towards the end of the story, he shoots the last guy that's with him because he wants to poison the water system. Because what happens is the mayor sends him a bag of cash, but it's actually full of tear gas. But unfortunately, it's a windy day, and when Simon opens up the bag, the tear gas gets blown away instead of going in his face. So they manage to get away. So Moon Knight sees them getting away, and so he decides to grab a ride on the mayor's helicopter, and then, like, goes after Simon in his car, which is where Simon kills his partner. He shoots him because Simon has a big barrel of poison, and he's going to go dump it in the water system. And Simon is about to dump it in the water system, and Moon Knight beats the crap out of him and stops him. And that's how he beats Simon. He also does go and find Marlene, who is hopped up on the drugs, and he has a massive fight with Marlene. Marlene actually straight up stabs him in the shoulder, and then Mark, unfortunately, has to... He only punches her once, but he punches Marlene in the face and then knock her out, because it's the only way that he can stop her from killing him, and then he ties her up. And he doesn't enjoy... Like, he hates it. He hates the idea of punching her. It's just like, I love you. Like, I can't believe I have to do this. So he punches her out and then ties her up. And then he goes and stops Simon. But because he was stabbed in the shoulder, it hurts a lot when he's, like, grabbing onto the helicopter and stuff. He's just like, I feel like my arm's ripping out of my socket. But yeah, he stops Simon. He saves the city of Chicago. And unfortunately, the Moon Knight copter, the Moon Copter, has been destroyed. So Stephen Grant is planning on possibly getting a new one. This would be his third helicopter. Maybe the Moon Copter is going to get a new redesign, because right now it looks really bad. It's just like a crescent moon-shaped helicopter. Really impractical. So So I guess Bill Sankovic is going to design a new one. And that's where it ends. It ends with, like, Chicago, the water systems are being fixed. Everyone's happy now. Yeah. Also, there were a couple of, like, Simon's guys who, like, went to Ernie's apartment, and they got covered in the water. We never found out what happened to them, but it's assumed that they went all homicidal, and then they either died or, like, the police came and stopped them. But yeah, that's it. That's where it ends. And the next issue, issue 9, is known as the Vengeance in Reprise, the surprise return of a villain from Moon Knight's past. So I guess we're going to find out what it is. Is it Midnight Man? I mean, that's the only villain that Moon Knight has that hasn't died. So it's probably Midnight Man. Alright, so issue 9 is kind of like the first part of like a series final, where we're pretty much tying up all of the storylines that we've been going through over the last 8 issues. It's a culmination of some of Moon Knight's greatest villains that he has faced so far, all 2 of them that are still alive. So the Bushman has escaped from prison, which Moon Knight isn't surprised, so he's out in the city looking for information to find where the Moon Knight is. So he heads to, like, these gamblers, like this place where people are gambling. He breaks in, and he fights the guys and tries to get information out of them about the Bushman. One of them manages to run away, thinking that he got away without Moon Knight seeing him. The other guys are like, hey, we know nothing about Bushman. Like, we don't know where he is, and Moon Knight's like, I believe you, and so he heads off, and he decides to tail the guy that escaped as Jake Lockley. So he gets into his Jake attire, he drives after this guy, and follows him throughout the city, hoping that the guy will lead him to where Bushman is. Or either that, or he can, like, catch him, and then find out where Bushman is. One or the other. Meanwhile, Marlene is talking to Samuels, and they're talking about the Khonshu statue. And they're talking about the fact that, like, what do they believe happened? Like, did... They call him Steve because that's the identity that they most refer him to. But, like, did Steve die during the night that... Like, during that night, did he actually die? And the Khonshu statue, like, did it just bring him back to life? Or did it actually possess him? And he's like, which one do you believe? And Marlene's just like, I don't really... I just believe that, like, I don't really know what to believe. Like, I just believe that, like, he came back to life and that was it. Like, I don't think there's anything supernatural about this. I think he's just obsessed with the statue, and I think it's bad for his mental health. And this, like, they're always just saying, like, oh, it's like, he's got, like, schizophrenia going on, and, like, this is making it worse. So, while Marlene is asleep, it's at midnight, and she gets woken up because she sees a horrible-looking guy. And then this guy bumps into Frenchie, who had to stay back at the mansion to fix the helicopter, so he wasn't able to go out and help Moon Knight, because the helicopter got destroyed in the last issue. This mysterious dude bumps into Frenchie and runs away, and that's when they discover that this guy stole the statue of Khonshu, and they call up Jake, and they tell Jake to come to the mansion because Samuels has also been kidnapped, the butler, and they don't tell him about the statue because Marlene doesn't want to tell him about the statue because she's afraid that he'll care more about that than he will saving Samuels. And so Jake says that he's going to come back to the mansion and help him, but then he gets a lead on Bushman and he decides not to go back to the mansion. He finds a manhole and he assumes that the lackey that he was chasing jumped into the manhole because he disappeared mysteriously. So Moon Knight jumps into the manhole, and that's where he finds like this undercover like lair with all these things rigged about. Meanwhile, Marlene figures out who stole the statue, because she's like, oh, they stole the ancient statue? Let's go check the art room, and that's how we'll know who did it. And they head to the art room, and the opera cape, Midnight Man's opera cape, is gone. So it's confirmed that it was Midnight Man who Marlene had seen. It was at midnight that she saw him, so it all ties together. But why was he horrifically ugly, according to her? Well, we're about to find out. So Moon Knight heads to this base. He finds these weird, like, it's like spider webs, kind of like ropes tangled throughout the entire room, like spider webs, with like the statue of Khonshu in the room, and that's when Midnight Man shows up, and he's like, "Hey, Moon Knight, I'm here to get my revenge on you and kill you, but before I do that, you're probably wondering how I'm still alive." And he goes through the whole thing. He's like, I fell off of the roof into the water, and I passed out, basically, but I washed up to a sewer pipe right outside, like, nuclear waste facility, and the wastes got all over my face and, like, melted my face, and that's what woke me up. And then I headed back to my, like, apartment, and all of my stuff had been taken away, and so not only did you, like, ruin my collection, but you also ruined my portrait, my self-portrait, my face. So now I need revenge, and I need to kill you and get revenge for what you've done to me. And so he pulls out his gun, which is loaded with bullets, and he starts firing them at Moon Knight. And Moon Knight, like, one of the bullets sets him free because he's all tangled up, and he starts fighting Midnight Man. Midnight Man also destroys the statue of Khonshu. He just pushes it off in front of Moon Knight and is like, "Hey, this is your prized possession. Well, say goodbye to it." And he just pushes it off, and the statue of Khonshu just gets completely destroyed. It just shatters into pieces. But Moon Knight continues fighting as Moon Knight, so it's like the statue isn't what's powering him. Like, it doesn't matter if the statue exists or not, because he's still Moon Knight. So it's kind of like, is it really, like, a case of, like, he was possessed by the statue, or did the statue have nothing to do with him becoming Moon Knight in the first place, and it was more of a psychological thing? Like, that's the kind of thing that we're you know, setting up right now, is like, which is it? Obviously, we would know the answer now, because there's been different runs and stuff that has established that it is the statue, but at this point in time, readers wouldn't have known. But Moon Knight fights Midnight Man, and he manages to get a chance to knock Midnight Man out, while Midnight Man is, like, reloading his gun, and he beats him, and then it turns out that the one who was behind everything was Bushman. It was Bushman the whole time. Bushman locks the doors on both Midnight Man and Moon Knight. He hired Midnight Man as a lackey, and then he reveals that, like, the sewers are going to flood the building, and sewer waters start crashing through the walls and start flooding the building. And he also reveals that he did kidnap Butler Samuels, and that Butler Samuels is in there with them, and that all three of them are going to drown. And it ends on a cliffhanger right there. It ends with the room is filling with sewer water, and it seems like Moon Knight is going to have to team up with Midnight Man in order to escape out alive. So that's interesting, and I guess we'll find out how this unfolds in the next issue, which is going to be the final issue that we cover today. And kind of like a series final to these, like I said, this is almost like I'm reading an entire season of a show, because this feels like a series finale. Alright, issue 10, the final issue that we're going to be covering today, and a quote-unquote series final to, like, these first 10 issues. It kind of starts a whole new, like, era of Moon Knight, like the next arc of his character. And there's some stuff that happens in this where I'm just like, this is getting a bit complicated, and especially the relationship with Marlene, where I'm kind of just like, Marlene is not a good partner for Marc for many reasons. And this one really puts the nail in the coffin. And I don't know if Doug Mensch was doing that on purpose, where he was like, Marlene is not a good fit for Marc, and eventually he's going to figure that out and decide that he needs to get her out of his life, because she makes his life worse. Like, she unknowingly or knowingly is making Marc's mental state worse than it already is. And this one just goes full into it of like what she does in this issue is pretty horrendous for somebody to do to another human being. So the Bushman has revealed that he was the one behind everything, and then he says, "Hey Mark, remember like when we were mercenaries together and you almost died and then you found the statue and you became Moon Knight? Well, that all is because of me, which means I created Moon Knight, which means I am the only one who can defeat you. And that's why I've locked you in this room and you're gonna drown. Like, you're gonna drown today because it's destiny. It's destiny for me to be the one who defeats you because I created you." And so he runs away and he leaves Samuel's Moon Knight and Midnight Man there to drown. Meanwhile, Marlene and Frenchie find the manhole that Moon Knight has gone into, and Marlene is just consistently like, he must be insane because he's going into this manhole. Like, she never gives Mark the benefit of the doubt. She always assumes like, oh, he did this because he's crazy. Oh, he did this because he's insane. And that's not good for a partner to be doing that. Like, if you are dating someone who is suffering from schizophrenia or some kind of mental illness, it is not a good move as a partner to consistently criticize them about it and treat them like they're some kind of monster, which is what Marlene seems to do. She really only cares about Mark because she likes Steve Grant. And she doesn't like the other personalities, but like, if they really are all of him, then she should love all of them and not just Steve. And that's one of the problems that I have with Marlene as a character, and I feel like that is on purpose. That like, Marlene is a very flawed character who is not treating Mark the way he should be treated. You know? So Mark, or Moon Knight, tries to dig a hole in the wall in order to, like, you know, find a way to get through so that they don't drown, and he succeeds in doing so. Midnight Man goes through the hole first, and then we don't see him again for the rest of the issue, so it's assumed that he escaped. And then Samuels and Moon Knight go through as well, and Moon Knight's cloak gets ripped off, and it actually takes him a sec before he actually helps Samuels, because he sees the statue destroyed, and it kind of leaves him feeling empty, and he just, like, sees the statue, and he's like, it's gone. The statue of Khonshu is gone. Like, what am I gonna do now? And eventually Samuel snaps him back into reality, and Moon Knight saves him, and they get out. And Marlene finds his cloak, and she assumes that he's dead. And then Mark takes off his mask and is like, Samuel's, I don't know what to do anymore. This is it. I'm not Marc Spector. Like, ever since the statue was destroyed, I have felt nothing, and I've felt completely soulless. You know, I'm not Marc Spector, I'm not Steve Grant, I'm not Jake, I'm not Moon Knight, I'm nothing. I feel like absolutely nothing. I'm a fake. I've been pretending this whole time that I'm all these different people. It was never real to begin with. It's all fake. I'm nothing. And then he just leaves. And he goes missing. Moon Knight goes, like, Mark goes missing, or like, he doesn't even really have it. He's not going by any kind of name at the moment, so he's just nobody. So he goes missing, and they're all looking for him throughout the city. Meanwhile, Mark is just sitting on, like, a golem, talking to the head of the statue of Khonshu, saying, like, I thought I understood you, dear friend, but it turns out I never understood you, and I never even understood myself. I think it's time that we just went somewhere else and continued being nobody. And so, like, he's just come consistent with the fact that he is a nobody right now, and he is nothing, and he lives for nothing, and he has no identity, and he's just going to wander around as nothing. And eventually, and because of this, Bushman takes over the entire city, and eventually Crowley and Gina find Mark just, like, sleeping in the middle of nowhere with, like, newspapers as blankets, and they take him home, and they try to convince him that he's Steve, and Mark is just like, I'm not Steve, I'm not anyone, Marlene, like, I am absolutely nothing. And Marlene is just like, well, you are, like, the thing is, the way I'm gonna prove that this whole, like, the statue was powering you thing is fake, is the statue that was shattered was a replica of the real statue that I made that he stole. So the real statue is right here, and she reveals that she has another statue of Khonshu. She's like, the one that shattered was fake, which means that, like, this whole idea of you having powers is fake because you believed that a fake statue was the one that was powering you, and that's how much it affected you. And this gets Marc out of it somehow. He kind of just, like, is just like, all right now. And the problem is that, like, this doesn't prove Marlene's point at all. If anything, she's proven that the statue really does power Marc because she has the real one. Like, how does her having the real one and a fake one being shattered prove that Marc isn't powered by the statue? If anything, it proves the opposite. Until they smash the real one, they're never gonna know the real answer as to whether or not the statue is connected to Marc and is the reason why he has these powers and these alternate personalities and stuff. Like, it's just... And she's only doing this because she only cares about Steve and not Marc. And it's just kind of like they just move on from it. And so Marc goes off as Moon Knight, because he's Moon Knight again now, because he's all good. Because he found out the statue that broke was fake. And he goes after Bushman, and he chases Bushman into Botanical Gardens, which kind of feels like the setting that they were in when Marc became Moon Knight, like the last time they fought each other. And Moon Knight beats up Bushman and defeats him. And then it ends with Marlene just being like... Because Marc is like, okay, can you tell me the truth? Is that the real statue of Khonshu and the one that smashed was a replica? Or is that a replica that you created because the real one did get smashed and you just don't want me to believe that it was the real one that got smashed, so you made a replica? And she doesn't tell him the truth. She's just like, it doesn't matter. You're not crazy anymore. You know, it doesn't matter which is the real one or not. And it's like, what are you doing? Why are you mentally toying with him like this? It just feels wrong that, like, Marlene is withholding... Like, Marc asked her for the truth, and she decided to not tell him the truth. And decided to just continue playing... Essentially, she's playing mind games with him. And this is the crux of why I think this relationship is just not a good relationship. And I'm hoping that, like, it does lead to something and it's not just swept under the rug, because this is a comic in the 80s, so it very much might not go anywhere, and it's just kind of like, oh, like, haha, like, this is the relationship, like, you know, this is how it is, and this kind of relationship is fine, you know, because a lot of comic book relationships were like that. Yeah, I really hope that it goes somewhere. I could definitely see a writer in the future looking at this relationship, seeing how problematic it was, and being like, and retconning it, and being like, no, like, there needs to be, this relationship needs to be shaken up, and, like, Marlene needs to learn a lesson or two about what she's doing. And, like, I'm not saying Marlene is a horrible person, but she's definitely a very flawed person who isn't doing the right thing in the relationship. But yeah, I guess we'll find out if anything comes of this in the next issue of Moon Knight, which we will be covering next week, because this is the end of this week's episode of Moon Knight month. Next week, we're going to be covering the next 10 issues. I really hope you enjoyed this. I'm enjoying reading Moon Knight. There were a couple of issues that were a bit, like, mediocre, but so far, pretty good. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying getting into the world of Moon Knight, and you know, I'm really enjoying this thread of, like, does Marc have a mental illness? Does he not? And I like how they're kind of, like, questioning that of, like, we don't really know. Like, now we know, but back then it was like, we don't really know. Yeah, I'm interested in seeing where this goes. If you like the podcast, please follow, like the podcast, share it around, you know, get people listening to it, show it to people and stuff. Thought Moon Knight would be a good one to do, just because it's not like He's not like he's not like Iron Man and Spider-Man and stuff. I wanted to do like a unique character, and I thought Moon Knight would be a good pick for that because it's a character that not a lot of people really read, you know, and he only really became popular when like that show came out. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next week we're going to be doing the next 10 issues of Moon Knight, so I hope you join in for that, and we'll see where Marc Spector's life as Moon Knight goes then. So have a good morning or a good night, good day, wherever you are in the world listening to this, and I hope to see you next week. Have a good one.